I am Lourdes Castro Ramirez, Secretary of California's Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency. I also serve as the chair of the Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. On behalf of Governor Newsom and his entire administration, we'd like to say thank you. Thank you for the work that you're doing every single day to protect and assist Californians that are experiencing homelessness, especially during this pandemic. We know that these are difficult times, and we appreciate the compassion and the service that you provide every single day. It is with this in mind that we've created a new guide, a guide that will help you navigate through the resources, the funding, and the tools necessary to be able to provide that same level of care, whether it's to assist with services, shelter, or permanent housing. I also would like to encourage you to continue to embrace an equity and inclusion approach. We know that this pandemic has disproportionately impacted people of color, Latinos, African Americans, Native Americans, and Asian Americans. And so it is important that we be inclusive, that we listen to their voices, and that we provide services and approaches that are responsive to their needs and wishes. Again, on behalf of all of us, we thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for providing services, shelter, and permanent housing.
Hi, this is Matthew Doherty, and I'm a consultant supporting the work of the state of California to prevent and end homelessness. I had the chance to work with state agencies and with another consultant, Catherine Gale, on developing the guide to strategic uses of key state and federal homelessness during the COVID-19 pandemic. This guide was released by the state at the very end of July and is available on the web pages for the California Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. We've been hearing that people in communities have been finding this guide very helpful, but we thought it was important to provide this brief webinar to help people think through how to apply its guidance to their work and to their decisions on how to best invest a variety of federal and state resources. We know how very busy everyone is these days, so we're going to jump right in. Slide. The webinar is going to cover an introduction to the structure and the content of the guide, and a discussion with key state staff regarding important elements of the guidance provided about how communities can most effectively use various state and federal resources. Slide, please. The team for this webinar includes Allie Sutton, who is the Deputy Secretary for Homelessness with the California Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council, Corinne Buchanan, who is the Assistant Director of Housing and Homelessness with the California Department of Social Services, and Megan Kirkaby, who is the Deputy Director for Housing Policy and Development for the California Department of Housing and Community Development. But I'm going to turn first to Catherine Gale, who's a consultant who did a lot of the work on the creation of this guide, and Catherine will provide an introduction to the guide, its structure and its content, and how communities can use it to develop local investment plans to have the greatest impact. Catherine?
Thanks, Matthew. And I just want to say what a pleasure it was to work with you and the members of the state team on putting together this guide. And we really hope it's going to be helpful to California communities. As it says here, we're hoping that this guide will help them to plan both strategically and quickly. We're aware that a lot of resources are coming with rapid spend downs, and one of the purposes of the guide is to help communities to think about what to use and when, and particularly how resources can be used together. We're also hoping that the guide will help communities to think about both pivoting their response and growing their response at this critical moment so that it can provide more safe alternatives for people to being unsheltered, and particularly expand permanent solutions, housing, which we know is the solution to homelessness. And the state is also hoping that communities will use this guide in conjunction with other equity planning that you're probably already doing to look at and address disparities and increase the reach of resources that this significant bump in resources can help us do, reaching better into underserved and marginalized communities. The structure of the guide is really 4 tables. The first shows 10 key federal and state resources, many of them time limited or short term, and talks about their priority uses. The second table is an easy reference format that includes those 10 and an additional 10 federal and state resources and shows what they can be used for. The third table provides a sample investment plan showing how a hypothetical community could prioritize, order, and then invest all the resources in 4 critical program areas. And the fourth is a blank template that you can use yourself to complete a similar kind of plan. The guide focuses on 4 critical intervention types and how resources can be used separately and together to fund these different categories of programs that are so critical at this time. The first of these is interim housing, which means any program whose primary purpose is to provide temporary shelter for people experiencing homelessness in general or specific populations. The guide focuses particularly on non-congregate shelters, a type of interim housing which is recommended under public health guidance to make sure that people can stay safe during the COVID crisis. A number of your communities have stood up or expanded non-congregate shelters, and the guide is really focused on how can you continue to have additional non-congregate shelters or operate the ones that you've created. The second category, rental assistance, includes short-term and rapid rehousing, which is really time-limited rental assistance that can be anywhere from 3 to 24 months, after which people take over the rent, or longer-term and even permanent rental subsidies. The third category, permanent housing with services, looks at strategies to acquire and develop expanded housing, including permanent supportive housing for people with ongoing high needs, and service-enriched housing, which might have slightly less intensive services, but targeted services, often for particular populations. And the fourth category, diversion and homelessness prevention, is about making sure that we have well-targeted approaches that reduce housing loss that are designed to reach the people who are most likely to become homeless if they're not assisted. The first table covers 10 sources. 6 of them are time-limited or emergency and came about largely because of the COVID pandemic. That includes Emergency Solutions Grant funding in the CARES Act, the FEMA Category B funding, Community Development Block Grant funding under the CARES Act, Home Key, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and COVID-19 emergency homelessness funding. But it also covers other essential state programs that existed prior to the COVID pandemic, but can be used right now in order to address homelessness and to try and stop the spread of COVID, including HEAP, HAP, the CalWORKS HSP program, and HDAP, the Housing and Disability Advocacy Program. Table 1 provides detail on each of these 10 resources. Every resource is listed by what the program is, the time constraints that apply to it, what you can use it for, what the eligible activities are, actions that the state has taken to date, or other information about where you can find out what your allocation level is. And in particular, the 5th column, which we draw your attention to, is the recommended uses that the state is suggesting at this moment are the best use for this particular resource, both individually and in conjunction with other resources. Here are some of the takeaways that we hope you'll take from Table 1. We hope the table will help you to think about the time-limited resources that you have strategically, focusing on what they're best used for and by when. Home Key in particular is on a very tight time frame, and we know everyone's already looking at it and going to need other resources to put those projects together. HHAP is a great resource that can be used to help make that happen and to operate those Home Key projects. Non-congregate shelter is going to continue to be needed, likely for the foreseeable future. And there are a number of resources, including HHAP, ESG, and HEAP funds that can be used if they haven't been fully expended. And not everyone in non-congregate shelter is ultimately going to need permanent supportive housing. So the guide helps you look at a whole range of resources to help build a comprehensive rehousing plan with lots of different housing strategies. Table 2 summarizes the 10 resources that we focused on in Table 1, as well as 10 additional resources that aren't necessarily time limited. It's a crosswalk of the recommended uses that shows you using color coding what uses are eligible and what uses are recommended. So this table also lets you link to lots more information about each of the resources. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see those links. Some of the takeaways from Table 2 are emphasizing that there's actually a wide array of state and federal resources that you can consider, and we're really hoping that communities will plan for all of those resources and not just the one-time funds. Coronavirus relief funds are flexible, but they're going to be going away soon. They have to be expended by December 30th of this year. We hope you'll look at how you can use them for housing, non-congregate shelter, and prevention needs. And the funds specifically for addressing homelessness, such as ESG and also HEAP and HAP, should really be primarily dedicated to reducing current homelessness. The state wants to encourage you not to use those resources for prevention unless you've covered all the other costs that are related to helping reduce homelessness. Tables 3 and 4 are about helping your community create your own investment plan. So first, understand what's in tables 1 and 2. What are the resources? How can you use them? What kind of timing? Then you can look at table 3 as an example of how you might put those resources together. First, setting overall goals for what you're trying to accomplish in each category, and then each of the columns could designate which resources you're going to use for what purpose. Here's an example. The top part, part 1, shows the summary of this hypothetical community's investment plans. They've listed the number of hotels or other buildings and units that they hope to purchase by the end of this year and to improve if they need to. And then to think about how many of those they're going to keep as non-congregate shelter for as long as they need them. They're also looking at how they can put in place the resources to, in this case, rehouse all of the people currently staying in the non-congregate sites and up to half of people who are in other congregate shelters. And then they're looking at how much well-targeted prevention assistance they can make available to people in households who are most likely to become homeless. So that's the overarching plan. And then each of the columns shows how they're going to use the resources in the table to meet each of those 4 needs. So over on the left-hand side, maximizing FEMA reimbursements for as long as those are available, showing that they're using first any remaining HEAP, then HAP, and CDBG programs to meet that share, and using home key to purchase hotels, etc. Moving across, you see each resource identified, what its priority use will be, and in some cases, what the secondary use will be if all of that money is not needed for its primary use. If you are making a plan like this, not only can you lay out how many units or buildings you're going to acquire, how much non-congregate shelter you want to retain, how many households you're going to try and rehouse, and how many prevention slots you can then create once that plan is over, you'll also know how much resource you actually have. You can fill the table in not only with the source you want to use and the priority order, but actually with the amounts. So we've provided this template for you as a way to think through how to use all of these resources that are mentioned in the guide together. As you do this work, if you have questions, we've put into the guide who you can contact, both via email and which websites you can go to for more information. Really hoping all this information together will allow communities to make plans quickly and strategically. And now I'm going to hand it back to Matthew.
Great, thanks, Catherine. And now we're going to turn to our conversation with our state partners to help address some of the questions people using the guide may have. Now we're going to turn to conversation with our state partners to help address some of the questions people using the guide may have. I'm going to turn first to Allie Sutton, who's the Deputy Secretary for Homelessness with the California Homeless Coordinating and Financing Council. Allie, the guide focuses on eligible and strategic uses of funding for interim housing and the continuation and expansion of non-congregate sheltering, for rental assistance, for permanent housing with services, and for diversion and homelessness prevention. Why did the state decide to focus on these 4 intervention types specifically?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. So this is a critical time for our work. There is a significant amount of resources coming to our California communities, and some funds have very short-term spend-down periods. We want communities to be focused on what is most important to keep people experiencing homelessness safe during this public health crisis, which is housing, most of all, and safe places to shelter where housing is not available. We want to support communities to make inroads in creating new housing and using rental assistance to rehouse people right away. within their current housing markets. There are opportunities now to begin rehousing people out of our shelters and motels, and we want to use this moment and these resources to make that impact. We know communities also are concerned about people who may lose their housing. That's important too, but really needs to be targeted to those most likely to become homeless. The guide focuses on how to use resources for each of these critical needs and which ones to use for what. We especially want to make sure that the resources with a short time to spend down are used to make as much permanent impact as possible.
Thanks, Allie. And the guide also talks about centering racial equity within communities' planning efforts and their investment decisions. Can you say a little bit more about what that looks like?
Sure, absolutely. So both homelessness and COVID-19 have had hugely disproportionate impacts on communities of color. Black, Latinx, and Native American communities are in many cases vastly overrepresented among people experiencing homelessness relative to their proportion of the general population, and are also at much higher risk of getting COVID-19 and experiencing negative impacts from it. As communities are creating their approach to controlling the spread of COVID-19 and reducing homelessness, it's critical to consider the disparities in both experience of homelessness and outcomes for different groups. So this means a few things. First, it means ensuring that the needs, experiences, and voices of highly impacted racial and ethnic groups are fully included in designing, implementing, and evaluating impact. It also means using your data to understand who is overrepresented or underserved, what kind of outcomes your system achieves for different racial and ethnic groups, and bringing that information to bear on how you measure success and on what you fund. And in particular, it means that we encourage communities to use this immediate opportunity of increased resources to better reach underserved communities and bring in non-traditional providers who serve disproportionately impacted communities. For example, as you stand up more non-congregate shelters or provide services in new housing, who can you fund or partner with that serves in culturally competent and reflective ways the groups that most need that shelter or housing? Or if you're going to do targeted prevention, funding providers in specific neighborhoods and communities that serve Black, Native, or Latinx people who are at higher risk of becoming homeless, even if their focus has not previously included this service. Be sure that you aren't putting up barriers in the funding process to new groups coming in. We know you have to act quickly, but we also need to go beyond the usual suspects to ensure this funding really reaches underserved groups and strengthen the community's overall capacity to serve marginalized groups and communities. Our HCFC resource page has a number of great resources about how to consider and address racial equity, both in planning and in contracting, that I hope everyone will take a look at.
Thanks, Allie. I really appreciate that helpful guidance. So now I'm going to turn to Megan Kirkaby, who's the Deputy Director for Housing Policy Development for the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Megan, how do you hope communities will think about the resources that are described in the guide, especially in relationship to the Home Key program?
Thanks, Matthew. So the Home Key program was created to help communities act quickly to increase housing and interim housing at this critical time. And most of those funds are being used for acquisition, although there is also some money available for operations. We've been thrilled to see the level of interest in the Home Key program, and the HCD staff are just working so hard right now to review every application that's been received. It is clear that communities see the opportunities of Home Key funding as a critical resource for addressing permanent and interim housing needs among people experiencing homelessness. But Home Key is just a piece of that puzzle. Communities need to be bringing other resources to the table and align them with the Home Key funding to make these projects work. We hope that communities are going to start using this guide to help them think through a range of state and federal resources that can be used to make a Home Key funded project work. So, for example, the state's HAP program can be a critical resource for operating costs. And I know Allie's going to talk a little bit more about that. So with the incredible response to Home Key, we know that there's this local momentum coming up with solutions to address and prevent homelessness after Home Key. And so to that end, we also see the guide as a great way to sustain that momentum and continue to come up with additional solutions.
Great, thanks, Megan. So the guide can also help people think through how to fund other kinds of programs and interventions that are described in the guide and that are essential complements to Home Key funded projects. Can you talk a little bit about how emergency solution grants, ESG, and ESG CV resources provided through the CARES Act fit into this bigger picture?
Sure. So ESG, the Emergency Solutions Grant, and ESG CV resources provide opportunities to both shelter people and expand rehousing efforts as a means of protecting people from the potential impact of COVID-19 infections. So this includes ESG CV can be used to continue operations and services at NCS sites after FEMA has ended, and or for costs or clients that are not FEMA eligible for reimbursement, although it can't be used to cover the 25% cost share. So, but people don't just need temporary places to stay, they need permanent housing as the best option for keeping themselves safe during the pandemic and to pursue other goals for themselves and their family. Therefore, rapid rehousing is also a strong use for ESG, CV, and ESG. And we really want to encourage communities to support people to exit non-congregate shelter, NCS sites, and unsheltered homelessness to get into housing. This includes that ESG CV can be used to provide rapid rehousing exits for individuals exiting Project Room Key sites and can support exits from future Home Key funded projects that will be serving as interim housing sites. It is also important to remember that there are still thousands of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness in California. ESG CV can be used to rehouse people directly from unsheltered settings, and by creating flow out of Project Room Key sites and future Home Key sites can create opportunities for new people to come inside to expedite their paths to permanent housing.
Great, thanks Megan. It's really exciting to hear the response to the Home Key program. So now I have a question for Corinne Buchanan, who's the Assistant Director of Housing and Homelessness for the California Department of Social Services. Corinne, what are you recommending regarding the use of other state resources, such as the CalWORKS Housing Support Program, HSP, and the Housing Disability and Advocacy Program, HDAP?
First of all, as my colleagues have said, we really want communities to think about all of the state and federal resources together in designing their plans, not just the new ones. HSP and HDAP serve particular populations, but can and should be part of a strategy to make all the resources go further. Using HSP to rapidly rehouse families in the CalWORKS program not only addresses their needs, but this lets other resources such as ESG, CV, HEAP, or HAP focus on other populations for whom fewer resources are available and help serve more people overall. As a reminder, we've recommended communities design their programs and make changes if necessary to best respond to the economic impacts of COVID-19. This may include longer periods of assistance or deeper subsidies than the county has allowed in the past, which may be necessary to maintain housing stability at this time. They can also work by linking very high-need families to longer-term housing interventions, such as housing choice vouchers or permanent supportive housing for families when it's clear that the longer term or permanent assistance is needed. HDAP can provide housing assistance to individuals who are likely to qualify for disability benefits. To access the COVID crisis, to address the COVID crisis, communities can prioritize qualifying individuals from non-congregate shelters or congregate shelters, or those living outside or in vehicles who are at risk for COVID-19. HDAP can also be used for temporary housing or shelter for HDAP participants if needed. Using HDAP for people who are at risk of severe health impacts from COVID-19 and who are likely to qualify for disability benefits, again, lets resources such as ESG, CV, and HEAP or HAP be focused on other needs and provides assistance to more people overall.
Thanks, Corinne. And I'm going to go back to you, Ali, for our last question. How can communities use resources from the Homeless Emergency Aid Program, HEAP, and from the Homeless Housing Assistance and Prevention Program, HAP, to round out their plans and fill gaps?
Thank you, Matthew. HEAP and HAP are very flexible, but we really hope communities will focus these resources in two key areas. First, continuing to support the operation and expansion of non-congregate shelter through the Project Room Key efforts. And second, to support new housing acquired under Home Key or similar projects. Let's start with HEAP, which has a shorter spend down time. We know many communities have committed most or all of their HEAP funding, but most communities have not yet spent their full HEAP allocation yet. If you have HEAP that is uncommitted or even committed but unspent, we want you to seriously consider moving funding if you can. HEAP is perfect to pair with FEMA while it lasts. It may be eligible for FEMA reimbursement and definitely can be used for the local 25% share, provided that the activities funded are FEMA eligible and comply with HEAP requirements. HEAP can also be used right now with HomeKey to quickly acquire buildings and units. If you need to make changes to your HEAP plan, please contact us right away. HAP is also a great resource, and there's a second round of funding coming. We hope communities will use HAP in conjunction with HomeKey to quickly acquire new buildings and units and also to operate them. We know that getting operational funding together is critical right now, and HAP can do that. You can also use HAP with Project Roomkey to continue to support non-congregate shelter sites and other interim housing operating in accordance with public health guidance. Like HEAP, HAP expenditures may be eligible for FEMA reimbursement and can be used for the local 25% share, provided that the activities funded are FEMA eligible and comply with HAP requirements. Even when FEMA reimbursement is no longer available, HAP can cover the costs of continuing to operate non-congregate shelters for as long as we need them. HAP is very flexible and can be used for rapid rehousing and homelessness prevention as well. But as Megan mentioned, we encourage you to use ESG for rapid rehousing first. We hope you can you are using CDBG or other social safety net resources to cover prevention. We know there is a lot of concern about prevention and a lot of pressure to fund it now. But we have the opportunity right now to make big inroads in housing people who are homeless today. And that is the primary purpose of our state funds here. Any HAP investments in prevention should be well targeted, placed close to the homelessness system, such as in problem solving or diversion, or targeted to those most likely to become homeless, and administered as much as possible by organizations that can reach into marginalized communities to help meet critical equity goals. The state expects that HAP is used for prevention only after your rehousing needs are fully covered.
Thanks, Allie, and that's it for our questions today. For folks watching this webinar, we hope you'll find this guide useful for your local decision-making efforts. And there are 4 key messages we especially wanted to highlight. First, the importance of bringing state and federal resources together into a single plan to reduce homelessness and to keep people safe. The guide can help you think through how to best weave those resources together within such a plan. Second, we all need to be focused on rehousing as many people as possible by creating new housing opportunities and using rental assistance to rehouse people quickly. A focus on rehousing people is an essential element of the crisis response to this pandemic. Third, that requires us to focus our homelessness-specific resources on a balance of non-congregate shelters and on rehousing people and helping them end their homelessness. And finally, we need to center our focus on racial equity throughout our planning, our decision-making, and our actions. And we must all strive to ensure that resources are reaching communities that have been marginalized and underserved, not just historically, but currently and yet again by this pandemic. Next slide, please. Please reach out for more information via the contact information provided here and in the guide. There are state partners ready and willing and eager to help talk through this information with you. Next slide, please. And thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar. And many thanks especially to Catherine, Allie, Corinne, and Megan for partnering on this project. We hope you'll all find ways to use this information and the guide to help you do your best possible work on behalf of people experiencing homelessness in California. Thank you very much.